Let's start first of all with our roll calls, beginning with you.
Christopher Stewart, present.
Brenda Myers.
Tom McFadden.
Diane Parsons.
Jay Stone. And Don Ecker has an excused absence, so he will not be here today. First on our agenda, we have with us a distinguished guest, Alice Quinn from the Indiana Department of Health, who took the opportunity to come here today and speak to us with her perspectives on the Silver District project. So, Alice, without further ado, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. McFadden. Yes, I'm Alice Quinn. I'm the manager of the Residential On-Site Sewage Systems Program with the Indiana Department of Health, a position I've held for 9 years now. I've been with the State Department of Health a total of, 15 years, 16 years almost. Prior to that, I was with Grant County Health Department for 12 years as a regulator, a local regulator, kind of in the same position as Faith Freed is here. So we are obligated to provide our mission and our vision. Our mission at the Indiana Department of Health is to promote, protect, and improve the health and safety of all Hoosiers. And our vision is that every Hoosier reaches optimal health regardless of where they live, learn, work, or play. So, oopsie, that's a little touchy. I'm going to go through an agenda today. I'm not going to read it to you. This is where we're going. I just have a few slides. Hopefully I can get through them fairly quickly and then be able to answer any questions for you. So my goal here today is just to provide some background on our rule, to dispel some myths that I've heard going around, and just basically give you a very basic explanation of what an on-site sewage system is and the issues that we run into when we try to replace those systems. So who am I? Well, unfortunately, I'm not here as a proponent to sewer, and I'm not here as a proponent to on-site sewage systems. I'm here to promote what's best for the community itself. I'm a proponent for research and education about options, making informed decisions, and implementing the best solution for each unique situation. Believe you me, there's a bunch of counties in Indiana that have gone through this very same issue with creating a sewer board and trying to get sewer to some of their underserved populations. So each situation has a unique solution, and that's what we need to find here. So common ground, our wastewater, can we agree? First off, the toilet paper goes over the roll, not under. But I have to throw a little humor in here.
I about that all the time.
That's the patent. But we have to agree that our wastewater must be properly disposed of. We must be kept as far as possible from our sewage, and it must be kept away from our drinking water sources and recreational sources. And our wastewater is produced in great volumes. So those are the main issues that we have to deal with one way or the other here in this community. And we need to understand that our wastewater, when improperly disposed, can create a public health hazard. Okay, that is actually in our Indiana Administrative Code as part of the definition, and that's why the Indiana Department of Health regulates residential and commercial on-site sewage systems. Okay, we have a definition of sewage. It's very short. All water carried waste derived from ordinary living processes. And we have to understand that comes from toilets. People understand that. Showers, washing machines, hand sinks, kitchen sinks, and even water softener recharge. So we're talking a large volume of water, any water produced in the home that's going to this on-site sewage system or to sanitary sewer for proper treatment. So what is sewage? Why is it such a big deal? Because, it mostly looks like water, right? Well, 99.9% of it is water, but we also have to understand that we have organic matter in there, which leads to total suspended solids, which are the little particles that float in our sewage. We have a biochemical oxygen demand, which is a measure of how strong the wastewater is and how much oxygen is required to kind of completely treat our wastewater. We have pathogens. That's probably the worst thing. People often talk about E. coli and E. coli test. We need to understand that E. coli is just an indicator organism. We test for that because it is a simple test, it's a relatively low-cost test, and it is very indicative of potential sewage contamination. But we also have a plethora of other bacteria, protozoa, fungi, viruses, which are very, very hardy in this environment, and they persist for a long time in our environment. Nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, which nitrogen can be passed through groundwater and can cause a problem called blue baby syndrome in those that are either pregnant and drink the water, or young babies that are fed, formula or whatever made with the water, if it has that nitrate in it. We have chemicals in our wastewater. We have pharmaceuticals and personal care products, all carried in this medium of water. So like I said, it's 99.9% water. It's that 0.1% of our wastewater that's really hazardous to us. So how do we properly dispose of sewage? In Indiana, we have a few options. The first one is an on-site sewage system, also known as the septic system. That's the official terminology we give it in state statute and in our rule. And then we have sanitary sewer, also known as the big pipe, right? So this is where a community can put their waste into a common collection system and send it to a municipality or a district or something for complete treatment. The on-site sewage system, by contrast, is an individual property owner's small wastewater treatment plant, and it does require ongoing maintenance and operation, and it has to properly function just like your municipal plants do. Thanks to some recent legislation, we also now allow permanent sewage holding tanks. And a lot of folks think that this is a great idea, and I agree. In some situations it is, but when we have a home that is regularly occupied and with normal sewage disposal, this can get very, very costly very quickly. And that's what we try to keep those who are applying for these types of tanks to understand. They also have to have a contractor, an ongoing contract with a waste hauler. And then lastly, we still allow sanitary vault privies, also known as an outhouse. We have a specific bulletin that gives us directions onto how those need to be constructed and maintained, and understand that those can only be used on a property as the sole source of sewage disposal if there is absolutely no plumbing in the house. So if there's plumbing in the house, you can have a sanitary vault privy, but you also need a means of disposing of your other wastewater. I'm not going to read this. This is a definition of residential on-site sewage system. Just be aware that that definition incorporates all of the components. The residential sewer, the septic tank, all effluent sewers, a soil absorption field, subsurface drainage. So it's not just a tank. Okay, we're talking about a larger system. In fact, our rule, and I will read this because it's very critical, any dwelling that is not connected or cannot be connected to a sanitary sewerage system shall be provided with a residential on-site sewage system that includes a septic tank and a soil absorption system that has not failed. A huge myth that goes around typically in these types of meetings, or where we have issues with failing systems, people believe that the tank is the system. The septic tank is a very, very important part of the system. Unfortunately, it's not the only part of the system. And in Indiana, we are what we call a soil-based state. So the sewage has to go to the soil for final treatment if we're using an on-site sewage system. And as I just pointed out, recent legislation has now allowed us the holding tank. So a holding tank is essentially a septic tank that goes nowhere. The outlet is plugged. It contains all the wastewater until it gets full, an alarm goes off, and then you have to hire a pumper to come out and pump that. Depending upon the size of the holding tank, those could need to be pumped once a week, maybe even sometimes more than once a week, but no less than probably 2 or 3 times a month at the very least. So what is not an on-site sewage system? And I think this is very appropriate for today. So we have a lot of common means of sewage disposal out there that don't meet the definition of an on-site sewage system. Buried sand filters probably are not a huge issue around here. Any type of discharging system, and we have those all over the state, unfortunately, and when the local health department identifies those, they have the authority and the responsibility to stop that. it does produce a health hazard. And then around in this area of the state, not in mine, we have too high clay content, but dry wells or cesspools, which essentially may or may not follow a septic tank, but are just essentially a hole in the ground where the sewage leaches out into wherever it's put. It's typically fairly small diameter, sometimes very deep, but oftentimes can get mixed with our groundwater prior to getting the sewage treated, okay? So what is on-site sewage system failure? We have a definition for that as well. It's any on-site sewage system that exhibits, the first thing is interference with home plumbing, i.e. a backup, okay? So that can be in any form. It can be gurgling pipes. It can be backup in a fixture like we see here. The second definition is ponding, seepage, or discharge to the ground surface or surface waters. That's the most common type of failure that we see, and it's probably the easiest to confirm. The third one is discharge that causes contamination of potable ground or surface waters. This type of failure is somewhat hard to discern, even harder to confirm. But if you see here in this sink, and this was a kitchen sink, unfortunately, there's dye coming through this sink. And the system for this home was tested by putting traceable dye through their drains and it coming up in their kitchen sink. So they had a direct connection between the sewage that they were putting down their drains and the water that they were using for drinking and cooking purposes. This is the type of failure that is extremely hard to detect in most cases, because as that sewage gets mixed in with our groundwater, it becomes less and less concentrated, which is a good thing, but we're still putting all of that bacteria, pathogens, chemicals, everything out there in that water, and it could potentially affect both recreational waters and drinking water. And as I said, that definition goes on to say a failure is a health hazard. So in the situation that we might be dealing with here, my system has failed, now what? Well, the first thing, and this is not meant to scare anyone, or it's just what the statute requires. An abatement order needs to be issued by the local health officer. Typically comes from the health department, one of the health officer staff. And with abatement, there comes enforcement. That's something that we like to see it on a voluntary basis, but sometimes it just doesn't happen on a voluntary basis. But then the homeowner should be required to pump and haul from their septic tank until they can put in either a new system or repair or replace their existing soil absorption field. And again, that can become very expensive. It can become long-term if there's an issue trying to get a repair or replacement in there. And then they need to make application to the local health department for a construction permit. And we have 4 things that are required: the application form, an on-site soil evaluation, construction plans which verify compliance with the rule. And we have to understand this is the part where we have to determine if best judgment. I know we talked about that a lot at the last meeting, public meeting, but I'm going to go through that very, very carefully, because it's not just whatever goes. We can't allow just whatever can be put into a site to be put into a site. So we'll discuss that more in a minute. The owner is required to obtain a construction permit from the local health department, and then the system is installed. And a thing that most people miss is there's still continued ongoing operation and maintenance. It's not an install it and forget it type system. Just like any sewage treatment plant, it requires maintenance. This is our rule, Rule 410, Indiana Administrative Code, or IAC 6-8.3. It's available online. It's soon to be updated early next year. It does describe best judgment in Section 53I, and I like to draw attention to the very first sentence of that section, which says, a soil absorption system replacement for a residential on-site sewage system shall meet or exceed the minimum provisions of this rule. That is a complete sentence. That is exactly what it says in the rule. So if we have a failure and we're replacing that system, we need to replace that system. That system needs to meet the rule requirements for new construction if it can. This section goes on to say, when replacement is necessary due to a system failure, so we have to have a documented failure, and a replacement system cannot meet the provisions of the rule, Then deviations to the rule can be made based upon the limitations of the site, which include the soil, the physical area, separation distances, landscaping, structures, a written system evaluation. So we have someone come in and evaluate the existing system and give us a probable reason for failure. And then also a written on-site soil evaluation where we hire a soil scientist to come out and evaluate the soil for our system. Whose best judgment is that? It is not the homeowner, not the installer, not the soil scientist, not the neighbor. I put that in there for fun because sometimes neighbors do want to put their nose in that. It is the best judgment of the local health department. And local health departments take that decision not lightly. They have a lot to consider. So if I issue a permit as a local health department for a system based upon best judgment and that system does not function for the home, then there is some liability if the local health department actually hasn't used their best judgment in that call. Also, with a homeowner, if you're getting a construction permit for best judgment from the local health department, you need to understand it does not meet new construction requirements. That could impact the sale of the home, but more importantly, that system may or may not function, and it may or may not function long term. So those are kind of the consequences that we have to deal with best judgment calls. And as you can imagine, there's a continuum of best judgment. We may have to make a minor adjustment. We have to make a couple minor adjustments. But when we get to the point where we're really making major concessions in that system design or size, that's going to negatively impact the system. And unfortunately, that's where I and my staff a lot of times provide technical assistance to a local health department because they don't want to make that decision alone. It's not a simple decision to make. Sometimes you're weighing a this for that. So an example, this is, and I apologize if I pull up someone's property. I didn't intend to. This is a lake in your county. Just wanted to show the shoreline there and the property sizes. I did an estimate. A lot of those lots are a third of an acre in size. This is just an example, or just to show you kind of what we're dealing with. And that's 14,520 square feet. An on-site sewage system may roughly take up 6,000 square feet of property. So we're talking the soil absorption field, any subsurface drainage, the septic tank or dosing tank, whatever were needed there. And then a home, relatively a small home, 1,800 square feet, and that's the footprint. Oopsie, that's not going right. Okay, so left over we have 6,720 square feet. Seems like quite a bit, right? Well, not really when you look at other things that may be affecting the property, like, the driveway, is there a garage? We have separation distances and setbacks, well radiuses for not only the property involved, but also the neighboring properties. Is there a floodplain or wetlands associated with the property? Do we want a swimming pool? There's all kinds of other things that can take up that 6,000 square feet. So here's an example, and I apologize if this is anybody's property. I just randomly picked a property that looked kind of average for the area. So this is a half-acre parcel, so we're looking at a whole half acre, not just a third. 21,780 square feet. This is a 3-bedroom home. The home itself has that is very touchy, 1,500 square foot footprint. I believe it was a 2,000 square foot home, but it's 2-story. 925 square foot of garage, 2,400 square foot of driveway, and a 7,800 square foot well radius. We have to maintain at least a 50-foot separation distance to a well, and that's in decent soils. In very poor filter soils, that doubles. And then not only do we have to be concerned about that well, but we have to be concerned about our neighbors' wells as well, because we all pull from the same aquifer. We don't want to make our neighbors sick. We don't want to contaminate our aquifer where we pull our water. We have some floodplain and wetlands associated with the property. And then we also have to maintain a 50-foot separation distance to the lake. So all in, that probably entails 2,600 square foot of the property just for those setbacks. Well, what we're left with is, very small area usable. About the only area usable on this site would be right there where I've shown the soil absorption field. And I do have the little tank down there as well, squeezed in between the well radiuses. So you can see where the lot size has a lot to do with how big of a system you can put in, where you can put that system. You have to be concerned about neighboring properties. And what we understand here is, what if that system should fail? Where are we going to put a replacement system other than right back in the same place where the system failed? So that's a big concern. So we have less than 1,000 square feet left over. If we look at all of that kind of together, I realize the well radius takes in part of the structures and things. So that's a huge concern. But the factor is we have to understand that the soil at the site has to be suitable for the system. That is a big question mark. And also with proper design, right by the lake, you're likely going to have subsurface drainage. And you have to have a gravity outlet to flow your drainage from. And if you don't have that, then your system stays wet. We don't have aerobic conditions in there to treat our wastewater, and that can become a huge problem as well. So dispelling some myths, these are just things I've heard commonly, not only in Marshall County, but in other counties as well. Once I get the system paid for, I will have no more costs. I can, cut that cost off, and that's not actually true. I live on a system. I pay $300 to $400 every 3 years to have my tank pumped. We've also had to replace our distribution box. We had to put in an outlet filter, and there's maintenance and replacement parts. If you have a pump, that pump is going to go out at some point in time. So it's not like you're going to pay for it once and just be done. You cannot forget it. I can't forget about it after it's installed, and that's because it needs maintenance. That part of the property cannot be used for anything other than yard. So you're not going to build a swimming pool over it. You're not going to put a garage over it or put a parking area over it. If my system fails, I can always replace it. Well, that is unfortunate because you can't always replace it. I have probably at any point in time on any given day, probably 5 counties that I'm working with on sites where they cannot replace a system. And that's a hard thing to swallow for property owners. If I have an aerator installed, my system is fine. Well, this is something I'm going to expand upon a little bit because I know that I've heard this up here in Marshall County. And what we have to understand, an aerator is just a single component of the system. You still have to have the septic tank and the soil absorption field. So we can't put an aerator on a dry well system or on a discharging system and expect that to be okay because it's not. We're still lacking that soil absorption part of the system. I can always rejuvenate my system, and some of the products that I've heard discussed up here are rejuvenation products, and they work very well. But what we have to understand is, again, we have to have the septic tank and the soil absorption field. We have to be able to rejuvenate the soil absorption field, and what wasn't discussed at the last meeting is in order to be able to put in a rejuvenation product, be it an aerator or some other type of unit, we have to have a confirmed biological failure in the system. So we've overwhelmed the system with biology. We've got TSS and the biochemical oxygen demand and the particles that come through in our sewage. It cannot be a hydraulic overload issue. It cannot be, my system's too small for this amount of water, which is hydraulic overload. It can't be, I can't drain my system. So therefore, I'm going to put an aerator in. An aerator is not going to help the water in the system. It can't be, I can't get a soil absorption field in, so I'm going to put this rejuvenation product in. That's not how it works. These products are given approval based upon a very extensive inspection of that system and a determination that it is a biological failure where a rejuvenation product may help the system. And it's a may. It's not always a given that it's going to help. And the other one is I'll get a variance for my system. We do not use the term variance at all in residential on-site sewage system world. We just don't give variances. we utilize best judgment, and that is, like I said, at the discretion of the local health department. So it's not like I can say, you don't want a dosing tank there, I'm not going to make you put a dosing tank in. There's no variance. It's you get what you can get as close to the rule requirements as possible. And that is all I have presented today. My contact information is there. Anyone is more than willing to, or welcome to give me a call or an email. And I'm here to answer questions, really.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Just because I've read the rule and there's a couple different ways that I guess maybe it could be interpreted, but what is the minimum square footage for the absorption area per bedroom in an ideal soil and groundwater condition? Remember, if assuming it's perfectly ideal.
Right. Per bedroom, I usually think about in terms of 3 bedrooms, so I'll have to divide it by 3. But with a 3-bedroom home in what I call decent soils, which is a 0.5 soil loading rate, we're looking at 450 divided by 900 square feet of soil absorption area.
Okay.
So 300 square feet per bedroom.
That's what I thought.
In that situation. But we base everything on the soils, the sizing of the system, and 0.5 is a really good soil loading rate. In my role, we deal with a lot of 0.25s or 0.3. So 0.25 obviously is half of 0.5. Double the required space.
So basically,
it would go from 300 to 600 square feet per bedroom. And we have higher loading rates. The lowest loading rate that we deal with is 0.25. So that creates the largest system. But then we also have to understand a lot of sites require subsurface drainage, which is put in 10 foot from the soil absorption field. So that's another large area that you're encompassing there. We have some systems now that we've approved. They're not described in our rule. They're approved under Technologies New Indiana. They do have a little bit smaller footprint, but they're very prone to not hydraulic overloading, but water infiltration from the site. So if you can't adequately drain the site with subsurface drainage, it's likely that system's not going to work well for the site. So
300 square feet in your best case scenario, basically. That's what I've always understood to be true.
It's not the best case. We do go up to soil loading rates of 0.75, which I can't do the math. 450 divided by 0.75 divided by 3 would be whatever. I can't do that right now, but so that would be the best case scenario. It's rare that we have that, throughout the soil profile where we can size a system on it. So there's no pat answer for.
By education and license, I'm a professional surveyor, and earlier in my career, I did work on a handful of residential projects. Our company kind of worked ourselves out of residential years ago for whatever reason, but
it's nice to deal with.
The handful I remember working on the preliminary plats. These were in Elkhart County and St. Joe County, Indiana, where we had to show on the preliminary plat, like a average house footprint and a well and all that. So they knew that the lots were going to be, buildable or whatever you want to call that. And I don't recall ever being allowed to use 300 feet of a bedroom. It was always 5, 6 to 8, 900. I mean, it was.
When we get up in the dune sands is when we really get the high soil loadings, 0.6s and 0.75s. I mean, it's still rare up there, but.
And what is the? I just want to make sure I understand it too. The maximum existing ground slope that is generally observed.
For subsurface systems, we can go up to a 6% site slope. 15% for subsurface systems, 6% for elevated systems.
I thought it was 15. Okay.
Yeah, for subsurface. And that 6% gets a lot of people, if you can only put in an elevated system and you've got 6.2% slope, I've got a site right now I'm dealing with that's 18 to 30% slope and only has enough soil for an elevated system. So we're scratching our heads trying to figure out what to do with that.
This is Glenn. I'm glad you announced that there would be no quiz after your presentation.
Oh, did I not say that?
Oh, sorry. I really appreciate that. You've given us a great deal of information. And one of the things that I just want to emphasize perhaps in my own mind is that the local health department, we'll use Marshall County for an example here. You talked about the word variance, but and how it's not used. But I want to make sure that everyone in the room understands, or at least I understand it as well, is that the local health department must adhere to these what you described as the minimum standards.
Yes.
Any application or restoration of any sanitary sewer system that's or septic system that's placed in Marshall County or in the state of Indiana, period.
You are correct.
This is it.
Yes,
So
it's
that's
Indiana
it.
Administrative
But the
Code
local
is minimum.
administration of the county council and the county commissioners, as they've done here in Marshall County, says we're erasing all other ordinances that pertain to the health department as far as setbacks, minimums, whatever it might be. This is the basic. This is what you have to meet, irregardless of anything else that may have occurred or
Yes.
exists, correct?
All 92 counties are bound by the Indiana Administrative Code as the minimum requirement. A couple of years ago, the Indiana legislature made all local on-site sewage system ordinances, so county ordinances pertaining to septic systems, null and void. Anything more stringent than the rule. However, the rule still stands as a minimum requirement. Separation distances, sizing, everything included with that.
Is it a fair statement to say that lakes in general and the way lakes are plotted out frequently, and you apparently made a close examination of a sample here in Marshall County, and that wasn't my house, thank goodness, that you utilized as a sample. But the short side of that story is it a fair statement to say that lakes in and of themselves, that the way they're platted out, and have platted out over the history of the county, present pretty unique problems with respect to the disposition of sewage? Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement, and it's not absolutely unforeseeable that we can meet rule requirements on a lake lot. We've done it many, many times. But when you have an existing lot and existing confines of property lines and existing structures, it makes it a whole lot more difficult to meet those requirements.
Okay. And there's been previous discussions brought up by both sides here about the restoration of an existing system and whether or not you can use the existing soil for restoration of a system in order to meet compliance with the rules and regulations here. Now, is it my understanding that yes, you can, but you still have to meet some form of soil configuration that will allow for the system to work properly?
To answer your question very directly, there is no prohibition in the rule from making a best judgment call to replace a soil absorption field exactly where the previous soil absorption field was placed. It is not ideal by any means and not the preferred method for replacement of a system. It's only done as a last case or last scenario, situation where we have no other place. What we have to understand is, first off, when you install the system, the original system, the soil is disturbed. Okay, so then we're putting the replacement system into disturbed soil, that is prohibited by the rule for new construction. Also, that system that's already in there has failed. It's failed for a reason. It could be soil related, it could be related to a different issue, but it has failed. If we cannot rejuvenate that soil prior to putting that new system in, we're likely to have the same issues because we're putting our wastewater back into the exact same soil that previously caused the system failure. Okay. So, like I said, it's not ideal. Do we do it? Absolutely, we have to.
Okay, and my final question is best judgment. Best judgment usually lies in who is the director over the health department, and he disseminates that best, or she disseminates that best judgment discretion to individuals within the department to make decisions. Is that a fair statement to say?
The best judgment call is left 100% up to the local health department, yes.
And that best judgment, it could vary from one county to another based upon that directive. Is that also a fair statement?
Absolutely, and it can vary site from site, even neighbors. This best judgment for this person could be, extremely variable from the best judgment for this.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. It was excellent.
Which leads me to my question. Do we have your permission to put this on our website?
I will have to get it to you in PDF format because, as you see, this is an IDOH slide, so there's issues there. But yes, I can send it to you in PDF.
Okay, well, thank you. Anything else for Alice? If not,
All right.
thank you again for coming.
You're more than welcome. Can you send it to me that way?
Okay, next, we have to approve meeting minutes. Both the August 13th board meeting and the August 27th executive meeting minutes.
I move to approve both sets of minutes.
Do we have a second?
I second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay. Financial,
We have to do it per person.
okay.
Well, he's not online.
There's nobody online.
Oh, he's not
No,
on.
Don has an excused absence. He's not here today.
Okay. Then why did we sign in?
Okay, now we'll move on to the next portion of our meeting, financials and claims approval. So,
Beginning balance was $2,126,596.84. Monthly interest earned was $7,523.81. Disbursements were $78,206.27 for an ending balance of $2,025,914.38. Claims approval for this month total $59,385.19.
do we have any questions? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
Yeah, I would prefer to begin. I have a question to JPR. Where are we at in terms of wrapping up? Those properties that were in the queue that have asked for site visit and potential easement to the property.
So on site visits, I can confirm, I think that we've had 92 requested to date and we've completed 89 of them. And for easements, we have received 100 out of the 580.
And you haven't had my easement yet, is that right? I'm in the queue.
I can
So
look
to
it up.
speak.
I can look it up, yeah.
I have one of those unique situations. And I apologize for not getting around to get that done, but I intend to do so. So are the monthly expenses for JPR, just give me a ballpark. I mean, I gotta get a grasp of, how we get to these numbers. How do you calculate how much time you've spent to charge us back for those types of inspections?
I'm actually going to be touching on some of that when we get to me. How
about getting to me right now so I can
do that.
understand how I'm approving?
It's really simple. Our contract is worded as if it's kind of a lump sum contract, but we actually invoice it more akin to an hourly to a max. So we whatever hours the various staff members put on the project every month, which every hour or every piece of time or every increment of time that's entered in our system includes a description of what they were doing. And I believe our smallest increment is 15 minutes or a quarter hour, generally speaking. But that's how the monthly invoice amount is derived, is how much time did people spend? And all those records are established and maintained in perpetuity.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sorry, I interrupted your motion.
That's quite all right. Do we have a motion to approve?
I move to approve that.
We have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Now for the exciting portion of our meeting, the legal counsel update.
Not too much. So we still have pending the Marshall County Commissioners, along with Bill Woodward, the Thomas McFadden. That's currently scheduled for a hearing on 10/10 at 10 a.m. So tens are lucky on that date. Nothing really to update there. Just the hearing, pending the hearing. Still just a little month out from today. And so we'll have an update following that. I don't imagine that we'll have anything immediately from the bench. Generally in these situations they're taken under advisement, but if there's anything different than that, we'll be sure to let you know. Following that, the only other item to update, there's past, following the joint session, the Marshall County Commissioners adopted Resolution 2025-9, and similarly, the Marshall County Council adopted Resolution 2025-10. We understand that they have communicated that to IFA and IDEM, but we are not aware of any ongoing discussion, we've not had any contact from the commissioners or the council or any particular notice of this from IDEM or IFA. We have reached out to IDEM and IFA and are in contact with them to coordinate a meeting, and that planning still foreshowing the commissioner is currently at a conference and won't return until next week, or it was this week. So we're just waiting on a reply. So that's all I have.
Okay. Well, we don't have an insurance committee update. We don't have an engineering committee update, so we do have our engineer here to provide his update. Go ahead, Kenny.
Is there anything that you wanted to touch on before I start?
No, I kind of pared things down, and per the board's request, there's been a few things that we have slowed down on, and but I know that we did commit to this cost analysis that Kenny is about to go through as well. So I'll leave that for you to talk about. But
Okay.
for sub-consultants, land acquisition, and preliminary design, we're kind of like pumping the brakes on that a little bit. We're still receiving some easement packets as well. But other than the fact that we've completed, over 90% of our site visits that have been requested out of us, and we have received 100 of the 580 easements as of, I think it was Monday that I kind of started putting this together. And I believe last month we discussed a new easement deadline in a letter, and I think, do we have a copy of that here today in our board packet?
That should be.
I don't see it.
It is from, it's this one. It's on the Marshall County letterhead.
It's only one sheet, so it might have got stuck. It's right before this big packet.
Oh,
So just wanted to draw some attention
Yeah.
to that. Not sure if there's been a chance to review, but I believe that's something that we'd like to send out in September yet, so I think we would need to get approval for that to get sent out.
has everyone on the board reviewed the letter?
Yes.
Do we have a motion to approve sending it out?
So moved.
Second? Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And as far as the rest, I will let Kenny take it over because he put together quite a memo for us all. But
I'm not going to read the whole thing. Don't worry. Okay. there's a couple things that Diana passed out, and hopefully left one for each of you up there. The first one is a standalone map of PSA 1, and it's a little difficult to read. It's meant to be printed 2 foot by 4 foot in size, but I didn't want to wrestle that in here today. And what it is, the purpose of it. Oh, is it not on?
No, they're very directional.
Well, the light is red.
There's my.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, the purpose of it was to try to, I've been asked by members of the public as well as a couple different board members and even a few members of our team, a few different questions about the project area and average parcel sizes and things of that nature. And I thought one of the easier ways, or maybe one of the better ways to try to answer those questions or communicate to others what goes through my mind as the surveyor that's been assigned to the project with regard to the 1,315 acres that PSA 1 comprises. So this is my attempt at a visual representation of what I think the most interesting pieces of data are. And we'll email a PDF also so that the data that's in the lower left corner is actually readable by any human being past the age of like 25 because of the font sizes as small as they are. But the interesting thing is out of the 1,315 acres, just over 42% is your water bodies. We've got 2.75% allocated to the 2 campgrounds that are within the project boundary. There's a similar percentage, 2.82%, allocated to county and township owned parcels. Marshall County owns some public park property on the south side or southwest side of the Zane and Mill Pond, and I believe it's West Township. If you look in the kind of the geometric middle of the Camper's Roost campground, it's on the north side of Cook Lake. There's a little square parcel surrounded in their private parcels that's owned by the township. It looks like an old unused cemetery parcel to me. I mean, I guess it's unused, and I'm sure the campground hopes it's unused, but anyway, just thought that was interesting. About 13% is public road rights of way throughout the site or throughout the project area. And then 38% is your private occupied tax parcels. So basically the actual occupied parcels and the area of the water bodies collectively chew up about 80% of the project area, unsurprisingly. Just by a quick glance at the map, that's, if I made everyone guess, I bet we'd be pretty close to about 80% of the area. The overall average parcel size for the occupied tax parcels with homes on them is right around a half acre. There is 76 parcels that are greater than 1 acre. Those are highlighted in red hatch on the map to try to give a sense of how much of the project has parcels of that size and nature. Then there's a couple of large-sized vacant private-owned parcels, like on the southwest side of Lawrence Lake, there's a decent-sized parcel that's actually owned by the farm that's on the southwest side of Minnetonka Trail. They just own that piece of frontage for whatever reason. So that's your kind of visual and textual breakdown of the area, of the project area, just so that there's an idea. And I don't want to skip ahead, so I'll leave that aside, and then I'm going to jump into this other stack of stuff that we passed out. And I'm just going to hit the highlights of this, and then open it up for any discussions or questions. But the first section of it is to just try to kind of remind anybody that reads this of how JPR first was brought into this topic by Marshall County and worked with at the time, the Mercer County Water Task Force, starting back in 2019, to assemble a countywide preliminary engineering report to to work with the health department and the other members of the task force, as well as members of the council and the county commissioners at the time, to identify these densely developed and occupied areas that are in Mercer County that are not part of an incorporated community for whatever reason. And so that first section of this memo kind of hits the highlights of that process. It went over the course of 42 months. Our contract with Mercer County was for a $50,000 flat fee that we spent significantly more than, but we were held by that fee. It's not uncommon for companies in our industry to be willing and able to do those kinds of things for either at or even below the cost until they're with it, because it immediately gives you all sorts of background information and helps make you very qualified in the event that additional projects are pursued in later years. So it's a common thing. We do several of those a year for either counties or towns, because you can't really even start talking about a project until you can find some way to quantify some of the data supporting the possible need for it. So that's what we did and it began in early 2019 and it ran until around December of 2022. And as we all know, those were some interesting years, and a lot of things also happened during that period of time that were certainly unprecedented to most of us that are alive today, that had impact on all kinds of things, but mainly impact on the heavy construction industry and its financials and its economics. And the result of that was, if you go back and you look at some of the original estimates and things that were contained in that countywide analysis, and you cut to today and you look at some of the more recent estimates and budgets and things that we've put together, there's some dramatic differences. I mean, we've never seen differences like that in a period of time this size. And none of us that are working today have ever. This is the highest we've ever seen. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened before. It just happened before all of our careers started. In terms of inflation and with particular regard to inflation specific to construction and heavy municipal construction or public works project construction, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about at PSA 1 is a public works project that have to follow certain protocols and rules. I'm going to jump to the current status of our work, aside from what you already know about where we're at with resident interaction and easement acquisition and all of those things. Our overall agreement with the Mercer County Regional Sewer District for design work associated with the PSA 1 project includes all of the preliminary design work, permitting, and land acquisition assistance, as well as final design, final project review, and interaction with non-local and local regulatory agencies. And then, of course, construction administration and inspection, all the way up to and even beyond the end of construction. There are some post-construction services that are also included in there as the system becomes active, as your operator gets to know it, as people are starting to get connected to it, all of those things. And the budget for that is derived from that original PER, because when you're estimating project costs for each of the areas of concern, you're also those project costs necessarily include both what you'll sometimes hear us call hard cost or actual construction cost, the actual cost for digging holes and putting pipes in them and doing that, and then soft costs, which is the lion's share of which is usually your engineering, but you're also your legal and financial advising and professional services, and your land acquisition and all that stuff. So hard costs and soft costs. And so you look at the total estimate for the project and you back your way into what the cost of all of that engineering, and I'm saying engineering, but on these projects, you spend just as much time on all that other stuff as you do on the actual engineering, on the land acquisition, on the meeting with people, and we were so, what's the word, almost fanatical about that public interaction, and that is what does drive a lot of that cost. All that time spent on the phone, going out to meet with people, and you want to be flexible with regard to their schedules. You don't want to have to wait 2 weeks because of your own schedule. So if they want to meet on a Tuesday evening or a Saturday afternoon, you accommodate that. And certainly that accommodation, unsurprisingly, generates billings and generates costs and generates invoices. So, but as of right now, as of the end of August, we have invoiced 31% of our overall agreed budget of $3,081,550, and we are, I would say, about 90% done with what we call in the contract the preliminary design phase. And the preliminary design phase is all of the detailed topographic mapping of the site, of the all the project corridors, and all the properties and everything. All of the initial hydraulic, laying out the system, placing grinders about where you think they're going to wind up or where they need to be, gathering as much reference data as you can. In this project, we actually had staff go out and visit as many sites as they could access without upsetting anyone, to actually confirm existing well locations, and where we could find them, existing septic locations, because the locations of those two things relative to the home and the driveway, etc., have a direct and significant impact on where the best place for a grinder station would be to try to connect that person someday. So the only way to know that for sure is to go out there and find it. And so that's what we've spent a significant amount of our time doing. Also, public interaction meetings that have been held, preparing and attending these meetings. And in addition, we actually have 2 agreements in place with Marshall County Regional Sewer District. The one that I just described for $3 million and change, for PSA 1, design, engineering, permitting, construction, admin, inspection, everything. But we also have one for district administrative services, which is keeping minutes for all of these meetings, making sure the board packets are prepared, making sure all those records are maintained appropriately, relative to the public agency that you are, the local government entity that you are, because you don't have staff to do it. We're doing that inside that same $3 million budget, and that's part of the reason that there's room in that budget to include all of that activity. So certainly that activity has also contributed to the billings that have been generated to date. So that's where the current status. And to echo what Allie was mentioning is, I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't want to echo that yet. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about our services and activities going forward. But before I do, there are a few things regarding what JPR, our collective opinion with regard to the justification for this project. When you add them all up and look at them collectively, it's what we feel justifies the project. There are 596 residential properties within PSA 1. And if I would have had more time this week, I would have come here today with the full-size version of this map with 596 green push pins in it. Everywhere we know approximately where there's a system, because it's hard to picture what that looks like. And there's 596 of them around this collective water body. I'm going to treat it like it's one water body, just for the sake of this conversation. We got some of them. We just didn't have time to do it, or we would have, because it's an important thing to keep in mind. Probably we'll have that next month. Mm-hmm. So recently there was a joint work session between the commissioners and the council that we attended, and we had a lot of information prepared and ready to discuss that night, but we didn't have enough time to actually communicate it. So because this project or this meeting is public record and there are minutes being kept, there were some things we wanted to make sure got put in some record so that people could read it, and if they have questions, they can reach out and ask them. 13% of the project area, of the soils in the project area, as defined by the federal soil maps maintained by NCRS, are classified as unusable with regard to on-site septics. 60% are classified as very limited, and 27% as slightly limited. So just over 70% are either unusable or, quote, very limited. And that's usually a function of the specific actual soil type that's there, as well as approximate data about groundwater, where the groundwater is. We went through the acreage. Given Marshall County's average household size of 2.66 people, there's an estimated population in the project of around 1,600, based on 596 occupied dwellings. We have met with with 125 of the occupied residential dwelling owners. Not all of them resulted in an actual easement signature, because for whatever reason there was room for the grinder to be placed in previously existing easement or a previously existing roadway right-of-way. That's being and has been incorporated into our tracking data for all the parcels, because those people were not opposed to the project. They just were opposed to putting the grinder station in a particular location for various reasons. A lot of it had to do with, well, this is where my relatives park on the 4th of July, or this is something, or I have a future plan for this area as soon as there's a sewer system, so I can't have the grinder here. Which you wouldn't know until you talk to them. There's no data, there's no database where you'll find stuff like that. Let's see here. 66% of the existing home sites within PSA1 are served via undocumented private and on-site septic systems. That can only mean one of a couple of things. It either means that they were installed without a permit, or they were installed before record keeping took place or began here locally, which we understand to be around the late 60s, early 70s, which would not be unsurprising given when the Clean Water Act was created and put into place. And if they're older than that, then they're about twice as old as your average design, or your generally accepted design life of an on-site septic, which is somewhere between 20 and 30 years, depending on who you ask and where you go. The 596 homes within PSA1 are generating on average 94,000 and change gallons of wastewater per day. Overall review and analysis, this is the big one, of the PSA1 project area indicates that less than 20% of the existing home sites have available and adequate space to facilitate replacement of their existing septic system. Now, Mr. McFadden, with all due respect, has been asking about getting that number as scientific as possible, and what's tricky about doing that, as we've talked about, is what Mrs. Quinn was talking about earlier with regard to best judgment. You know, we can look at properties and we can look at the rules and we can make general assumptions about what is or is not possible there. But until you're sitting at the counter with the person whose job it is to decide what happens and to exercise that best judgment, it's hard to say for sure. But I'm 100% confident in saying that it is our collective professional opinion that it's less than 20%. And that's based on the area of the parcels, and what a lot of parcels, and I'll get into this here in a minute, in our project are affected by when you're talking about how much space is usable, is slopes. A lot of them are losing 30 to 50% of their usable space to that steep slope going toward the water, thanks to the existing topography. And if the slope is greater than or equal to 15% or 15 vertical feet and 100 horizontal feet, then a conventional underground system will not function. It will all drain to one part of it, and you won't be using the rest of your absorption field, which is why it's not allowed if it's greater than 15%. So to this end, I actually, with the help of a couple other staff, there's 6 example properties stapled to this stack. If you could flip to the first one. I don't know if they're all in the same order, but they're all drawn the same way. And what these are little schematic sketches using the survey grade topographic data that we've collected and created a 3-dimensional, CAD-based surface of the entire project. We can figure out right away what the slopes are on any given property in the project. And because we've gathered all the existing well and septic information that we possibly could, we can make certain informed, judgments or educated guesses, if you will, on what's going on and what could go on. So on all of these, you will see the subject property surrounded in a heavy red line so that you know what parcel you're looking at. You will see the existing septic and well areas, and you'll see our assumptions about what part of the property is available. And in most cases, it's the same area that's available for, and this is what should be really noted, past, present, and future absorption area. So depending on the age of the place, which we have on here as well, most of them it's a pretty good assumption that if they're not on their second one, there probably would be in the foreseeable future, given the ages. But I don't think we found one so far. We haven't done every single parcel in the project, and I don't think we will, because there's a finite amount of budget that we have. But we haven't found one so far that has more than 3,000 square feet available for past, present, and future. And we purposely selected a couple parcels that we knew were at or above the Marshall County zoning related requirements for lot sizes, which is 1 acre if the public sewer system is not available or not part of the issue or part of the topic, or 6,000 square feet or 0.14 acres if a public sewer is available. So there's a dramatic difference in minimum parcel size in Marshall County depending on the presence or lack thereof of a public sanitary sewer collection system. And so that's what these several examples are intended to communicate to the reader. And then this is just existing data. There's no proposed data on here. This is just what's out there today. There's a 45-foot rear yard setback from the water's edge in the zoning ordinance for the building, and a 45-foot rear yard setback from the property line. Sometimes the property line is the water's edge. Sometimes it's something else. And then there's a 50-foot setback for septic. There's also a 10-foot separation in IAC 410 between the building and the septic. So we have those 10-foot isolation areas shown in green, because green is your national utility color for anything sewer related. And we have the well radiuses shown in blue, both on the property that's the subject to the sketch, as well as the neighboring properties, because in most cases, your neighboring wells' isolation radiuses also have impact on one another's property. And any questions so far? The kind of the bottom line of why of how JPR looks at something like this is you're comparing two different options for a solution for a particular home or for a group of homes. And it's one of the most important things that we don't hear a lot of people saying out loud. We wanted to make sure that's said out loud today is that any discussion with regard to existing septic or whether you can replace it or repair it or add an aerobic treatment unit to try to extend the life of your absorption area. And I guess make a sidebar, the addition of an aerobic treatment type of system or septic tank or adding oxygen by mechanical means to your septic system does not remove the need for an absorption area. It's just there to try to preserve or enhance a less than ideal absorption area condition. So if you want to try to get more life out of that absorption area, or you've had performance issues in that absorption area because of the soils or the groundwater or anything else, adding an aerobic treatment component to your septic can sometimes alleviate some amount of those concerns. That's what the purpose of it is when you're talking about applying it to an already existing home with an already existing septic. If you are applying it like the several project examples that were shared with us recently when we had the Sledgehammer representatives here, they were applying it to brand new housing developments, planned developments with little shared community systems for this group of houses over here and group of houses over there. And when you're planning a neighborhood, that can make a lot of sense because you can save a lot of potential real estate and you can increase potentially your density of your project, or you can meet whatever the goal is of the local planning area as far as, or local planning authority as far as what kind of residential they have already anticipated for a given area. You can hopefully accomplish that maybe if you introduce those more sophisticated types of systems. But in the situation where you have a community system where either a subdivision of homes is sharing a community leach field or community septic, on-site septic of some sort, or just, maybe there's a development with 10 different blocks and each block has their own. That's, to most of those homeowners, it's going to feel just like living in a sewer district because there's going to be some type of periodic expense that you're going to have to chip in on in order to have that system and continue to benefit from it along with your neighbors. At what expense, I have no idea, but you're going to have to do something to participate in those situations. And the fact that it is a available technology that can be used in certain situations to alleviate certain issues or to address certain concerns is, I think, the best evidence or the best way that's demonstrated. And I had a copy of it in my file here somewhere. It was actually in their presentation in the form of a 2-page septic system site survey that I believe is what they would give a landowner when they're trying to decide what and how to apply their technology to their situation. And the questions on the survey kind of explain what I'm trying to explain. I think they do a decent job of explaining how complicated it is, frankly, to try to find a solution when you are closed in by all kinds of walls or regulatory barriers or physical, limitations or constraints on your project. And I'm not going to read all of them, but just a few examples are, they want to know when it was built. They want to know if it's owner-occupied or rental or commercial or what the land use is, how many bedrooms. They're even asking how many adults, teenagers, and children, which I thought was interesting. There's probably extra things they have to do if you have teenagers, speaking from personal experience. If it's a restaurant, they want seating capacity. If they want the reason, is it a new construction? Is it a healthy system at retrofit? A failure? property irrigation, health department directed or other. They even ask if there are current pharmaceutical drugs being used in the household. I'm guessing that's related to antibiotics because of the biological processes that they're counting on. They want to make sure that there isn't some other ingredient that's going to get introduced that's going to negatively impact that biological process that they're hoping to enhance with oxygen. They're asking about water softener backwash. Do you have a separate gray water system? Has the tank been serviced on a regular basis? And then if there's a whole subsection, if you've been in failure, the symptoms of the failure, chemicals, have they been used at all in any part of the system with particular regard to your disposal field or your absorption area or your leach field? There's a lot of terminology that means the same thing. Septic tank bacteria and enzymes, all of those things. And it's an excellent technology that's got all kinds of positive applications in all kinds of situations, but it's just another possible answer to a complicated question. And the bottom line is looking at what's out there in terms of existing topography, the age of the homes, and the overall density of the developments. We think it's less than 20%. And if we're wrong, we'd be happy to be proven wrong, but I think it would take a lot of data and a lot of detailed site-by-site work to really get that number exact. And one of the things you'll run into if someone was to try to do that is how much information that's specific to a particular site someone wants to go talk about if they haven't experienced a problem so far. And our experience, based on interacting with the general public, not only on this project, but on every other one we've ever worked on, is there's a certain sensitivity to that folks have. It is their home. So in many cases, we feel like we are their only advocate because it's difficult to talk them into coming here today and telling you all the weird things that are going on their property. It's personal. It could have negative impacts on their perceived property value and other things, and that's frankly why people are hesitant to do it. And that's why you rarely, at least in our experience, you rarely see them showing up in droves to talk about it. And I, as a land homeowner myself that's on well and septic, I perfectly well understand that. It makes perfect logical sense to me. So, anyway, one of the most important things I wanted to mention today, because I wanted there to be no question about it, and to make sure everyone understood, both board members, anyone that's in the audience, or anyone that's going to listen to what we say today. And that is, why the significant majority of our activity is on pause as of now. And that is that it was on July 1st of this year. I think it was in June, May and June is when we started hearing a lot more about the concerns that were being communicated with our local elected officials. And we started hearing about what some of our local elected officials were saying about those concerns. And then on July 1st, we were invited to participate in a teleconference alongside the NCLSD's financial advisor or fiscal advisor, and with two high-ranking individuals with the Indiana Finance Authority. And with the Indiana Finance Authority is who manages and oversees the Indiana State Revolving Fund program. So they're very important with regard to public works projects at the local municipal level. And almost every municipal client we have is in continuous interaction with IFA and or SRF for lots of reasons. It's the bank that everybody uses, basically. And what they told us in that July 1st phone call, in no uncertain terms, is that they would not be able to move forward to a final funding package until the disagreement with the local elected officials is resolved, whatever that means. Which, that's the first time in any of our collective experience that we've had that conversation with a non-local funding agency. So what that means is all the concerns that we were hearing here, the questions that we were trying to answer with regard to you're moving forward and you don't even have funding, and we were trying to explain that's because the funding's never finalized until you actually have a project out to bid and know what the numbers are. So you begin interacting with your non-local funding agencies when you start working on the project. I mean, that interaction begins immediately to let them know, hey, there's this project that's probably coming. And then in early 2024, we actually submitted documentation to the SRF to get on the project priority list and to stay on it for however long we were in the middle of preliminary and final design. Sometimes it's 2, 3, or 4 years that we'll have projects sitting on the PPL, moving up, moving down, depending on what other projects are coming and going. They're always given some amount of weight because of their seniority on the list. You know, how long you've been waiting. Sometimes will help you move up. And so we did that in early 2024. We were watching it, as well as Baker Tilly was watching it. And we began at number 22 in June of last year. And in the next couple of quarterly PPLs that were issued, it went to 21 and then to 20, which is what we've seen with our other projects, both that are on the list at this time and that we've seen in the past with other similar projects. They get on there and kind of slowly work their way uphill, which is fine because it takes time to get the design done and stuff. And then we had that meeting on July 1st where that was communicated to us. And then on July 11th, the projected PPL lists for fourth quarter fiscal year 25 and quarter one of fiscal year 26 were issued. And the project had suddenly dropped to number 36 and then number 43 respectively. So to me and to JPL, there's no question that the change in rank had to do with IFA's concerns about, hey, there's this local disagreement happening here. We don't have that happening with all these other projects, so we're not taking it off the list, but we gotta do something. And that isn't me, saying anything negative about those folks. We have great relationships with them, and I think they all do, frankly, a hell of a job. But so what had happened is the discussion about the very concern and the reaction to it kind of became what maybe you could say a self-fulfilling prophecy to a point, meaning that now we don't have comfort that there's a final funding package that's going to make sense. And you might recall for several months, whenever we would talk about this, both us, your legal, and your financial advisors would say, yeah, that's okay, this is normal, we're getting there. By the time we get to the end, there'll be something that makes sense, and if not, we'll change the configuration to something else that makes sense. An example of that, a recent tangible example of that, is the projects that we've been working on at Saguenay Lake and Hudson Lake right up in LaPorte County, where we designed it, put it out to bid as one large project. The bid prices came back and surprised everyone, including the non-local funding folks, like, whoa, look at these prices. And at that time, they told us that, hey, we've got the ability to give you a $5 million forgivable loan. It's rare that you hear the word grant used anymore, so it's forgivable loan per project. And so that district made the decision to break it into 2 projects, hoping that they could get that $5 million twice. There's a risk associated with that decision because there's 2 risks, actually. One is now you're putting off that second half of the project some period of time on the calendar, and the calendar means the price goes up. We don't know how much, but it's definitely not going to go down. So it might only go up a couple percentages, or it might go up 11% like we've seen in 22 or 23. But it's definitely going up. And that $5 million forgivable loan concept might not exist a year later. as you know, the purse strings are controlled by legislation and by legislators. So those programs and those rules and those things, if there's anything that's always true about them, it's that they're always changing. That's okay, but it's just the fact of the matter. They're never the same. They're never static for very long anyway. Maybe every fiscal year or two, there are things that will change. But for whatever reason, that district decided, you know what? As long as we're in this, we'll take the risk and we'll hope that this works out for the best. Or maybe there'll be another program that gets announced by then or something. And so that's where that's at. And we're moving forward with Saginaw Lake, and Hudson Lake's going to come sometime later. Hudson Lake is still on the PPL. I think it might even be in the top 10 or top 20. The last I looked. Allie, do you remember off the top of your head?
No.
But it's still there. Anyway, and it'll stay there until Hudson Lake gets built. So that little angle, I wanted to make sure it was pointedly discussed, because yes, there's some subjectivity there, but what's happened is what's happened. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone was thinking about it from that perspective, or had the ability to think about it from that perspective. So that is the biggest reason, frankly, that as a provider of professional services, there's some written and some unwritten ethical rules that we have to observe at all times. You know, there's the public health and welfare oath that all of us with licenses had to take and things of that nature, but it doesn't feel responsible, notwithstanding the issue with the ban and all those things. It doesn't feel responsible to continue to spend that money at a $40,000 to $50,000 a month clip until that conversation with the SRF no longer applies. And I don't think that that's a permanent situation by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a situation that we're in at the moment. And so our level of activity consequently has to reflect that in some way. Now, you have monthly district administrative services that you have to have done until you don't. So we're going to continue to provide those. If people reach out and they want us to meet on their site, we're going to do that. And your access to our senior level staff that are on the project, myself, Allie, the other Jones, Steve Hanshin, our involvement will remain the same, but all of our support staff that you would see if you looked at all of our detailed hourly stuff every month are on a wait until we tell them to do something status, only because there's only so much, frankly, that we can afford to do without charging for it, or with only getting to charge for it some months later. So, and we have to, I wish we had more freedom in that area, but we don't. So that is really kind of the bottom line of this whole package of information that I gave you today, and it is going to be part of your record going forward. There's a little discussion in here about affordable rates, and there's also, I don't want to forget the thing that Allie alluded to with regard to the various project options that we've been talking about putting values on. There's some discussion in the memo about that, but the important part of that was contained in the 4 pages of Excel spreadsheet printouts that you'll find in the back. And although we looked at multiple options, most of them came back with numbers that frankly weren't even worth discussing today, but the two that I thought were the concept of, first we looked at removing what we refer to internally as the Thomas Lake area. And since I have this thing up right here, I may as well just use it. But this is Thomas Lake. I don't know if you guys can see what I'm pointing at. Maybe I can twist one of these around.
They have them.
Oh, they have it? Oh yeah, hello, look at all those monitors. I think it's called the Hidden Lake Paradise Campground right there, and then there's a handful of properties around it. Because it's kind of off to the side relative to the overall project corridor, and the density over there is not the same as it is in most of the rest of the project. We wanted to make sure it made financial sense to run a line down there to grab that relatively small amount of equivalent dwelling units. So that's being called, in the context of the attachments to the memo that were passed out, option 2. And that option 2 is the current project as envisioned, but with that area removed. Frankly, we're not seeing a big enough difference in the overall cost to make it logical to remove it, and there might even be a small negative impact in the eventual monthly rate because it's less EDUs chipping in on the overall cost. So there's a bit of a subjective judgment call there. We don't have to make that decision today or anything like that, but there's some information here that you can review at your own leisure, and we can discuss that in more detail at a later time. And then there's also a option that's a lot bigger and bolder, but the numbers that it generates are commensurately dramatic in terms of how different they are from the current overall pressure sewer project, everybody connects to it configuration. And what we're calling it is a, quote, pipe-only project, end quote. And what that is basically, and it wouldn't be the first time. It's been done before. It's not done very often, but it has been done before. I believe Simonton Lake Conservancy District, up on the north side of Elkhart, has this arrangement and still does, wherein the public entity installs, operates, and maintains all of your main transmission lines that are in the roads, and in this case, it would still be 2 large municipal pump stations, and then a network of pipes, and every landowner gets a gravity stub to connect to somewhere on the front property line, or otherwise known as the right-of-way line of the roadway. And we'll try to put it in the most logical spot. But that is the end of your project, and the landowner purchases and installs and operates and maintains their grinder station. You're eliminating cost from the public project, but you're not eliminating cost from the average person's pocketbook. You're just taking it from A and you're moving it over to B. Whether that makes sense politically or otherwise is completely subjective. They would still have to babysit that pump forever, but they would have absolute control over its placement on their property. So in exchange for spending that similar amount of money in a different way, they're gaining a lot more control over their configuration on their land, because at that point, the district doesn't really care where it goes as long as it works. So whereas what we're doing now, our policy is it's not more than 10 feet into your property, because we're trying to treat everyone the same and we're trying to control project costs. We just wanted to look at what the numbers were. They do, unsurprisingly, there's a dramatic difference in potential monthly rates. And the last 2 pages are the same thing we've always seen, which is a set of monthly rates that assume 0 grant or forgivable loan, and a set of monthly rates that include some significant amount of forgivable loan or grant. And you see, generally speaking, about a 2 times cost reduction factor in terms of that monthly rate. So it was just an exercise. We wanted to see what the answer to it was, and we wanted to be able to tell you what we thought the answer to it was, on the chance that for whatever reason it made sense to look at that closer. So again, no decisions about that have to be made. From an operational maintenance standpoint, it would probably still be simpler and easier for one entity to handle all of that at a given monthly cost. And as a landowner, I would prefer that personally. I live on well and septic, because if I'm paying something every month, I don't really have to think about it again, unless I see a little red light going and I have to make an 800 phone call, and wait 30 minutes. other than that, I don't want to have to think about it. I want to get that for the value of my monthly bill, just like you supposedly get from your other utilities. So, no one has to replace the meter for NIPSCO or, you know what I mean, or anything like that. So, that's why that's in there. It's the result of it, frankly, was so unsurprising that that's why I'm really not going into it in detail, because it's just information. But I ultimately, I think sitting here today, the bottom line of all of those exercises are, and the bottom line of even what we're seeing in other district clients do, is these projects cost money, and they cost real money. And what we've seen with concerns with regard to monthly rates, with not only in Marshall County, but in LaPorte County, and Steuben County, LaGrange County, Whitley County, every countywide district that we work for, frankly, is, and I'm not trying to make the issue smaller than it is, because it's a significant issue that affects all of us. It affects me and my household as much as anyone else. Is inflation doesn't. You don't wake up one morning and inflation has happened, where suddenly all the prices are up to some other number, but so are your wages. And so it happens to one thing at a time. And it is alarming for different reasons to different people at different times. And I think there is an element of having to decide what, in the context of today, where we sit today, what does a monthly rate make sense? What monthly rate is affordable? What is doable? What is realistic for a from scratch utility that didn't exist before? The only similar examples that we have, I guess, in recent years are the significant amount of fiber optic infrastructure that we've seen installed, in particular in rural areas, in the same areas that most of the projects we work on like this are located. And I'm one of those people that's a customer of fiber optic that was installed in a rural area in Elkhart County. And I'm spending $160 a month, and they don't own a wastewater treatment plant. So I'm not saying that's the right number. I'm just saying that's what a utility that didn't exist before is costing. And it is a utility. You can't live without it anymore. It's your phone line, it's everything. So as much as I hate to admit it, it is just the way it is. I can open and close my garage doors now because everything you buy has a Wi-Fi. You have to connect to the app on your phone. But anyway, so when I say that real time and attention needs to be, thought needs to be given to that topic, I don't think I can emphasize that enough. And not just for board members like you, but for consultants like us, legal advisors like Chris, all of us have to think about this. What is realistic? What is a target that can be achieved? And what is affordable mean? And these are rhetorical questions, but they're critically important on projects like this. And it is, in large part, if I had to guess, what the biggest concern that we've heard people bring up, not only in these meetings, but at the county commissioners and the county council meetings, some of us were at, some of which we weren't at, most of which we weren't at, frankly, it's cost. It's the cost of getting connected initially, and then it's that monthly cost afterwards. Because if you haven't had to deal with it before, it is a big concern. You don't hear about it, frankly, from the folks that have had to make significant septic repairs. Those are the people that have already had to face the reality that this thing does cost them money. But until you've had to face that, it hasn't. And that's what we're dealing with. So anyway, that's the end of my spiel. Sorry for taking so much of your time. And I'm happy to discuss or ask questions about any of that.
Okay, in terms of our applying again for funding from the Indiana Financing Authority, excuse me, in our application for what will be now 2026, is there anything that your firm has to do physically at this point to improve our application? Outside of perhaps maybe more people signing up for easements and that sort of thing?
So we typically in December or January, because the SRF scoring changes annually, it's not usually a significant change, but they sometimes have requirements to asset management, planning, capital improvement planning. I know this year the big push was the cybersecurity agreements and stuff like that. So we typically get those requirements in January or sometimes as early as December is when I start asking to see what needs to happen. So I would say we would start on those when we get that list. It typically takes a lot of time and a lot of coordination between JPR, Baker Tilly, and Carson as well. It takes a while to kind of put that stuff together as far as an update goes. As far as our project, to get that all put together, because I mean, you really do need to have a project, I would say 90% bid ready, I think, when you get that go. That would be 3-4 months, would you say, to get the project totally put together and ready for permits?
Yeah.
So I mean, outside of site visits and the things that Kenny had discussed that we've been talking about, I would say we could pause that large effort until the first of the year, I guess. Still doing administrative and other things, but
I think another way to say what Allie's saying is there's a scoring matrix that they use to assign point values, and those point values decide where you stand in that list of 100 or so projects. Generally, there's about 100 projects on there pretty continuously. And the question of how ready are you to go to break ground certainly has impact on that. It's hard to figure out where exactly in that scoring matrix that question is applied, but it's certainly applied. And as you get closer and closer to being ready to go, it's not uncommon to see your ranking increase.
Maybe I missed.
As soon as you're in the top
maybe I
10,
missed
you're-
your orientation, and I apologize, but where are we at in terms of ready to go at this point? I mean, was our application not completed, ready to go in 2025, 2024?
so it is, but you
I'm looking for a percentage, I
you have
guess.
to update on an annual basis, I guess is what we would say.
Okay.
You have to continue to coordinate your effort with them. Sometimes they ask for different things. We aren't going to know what those are until I would say mid-January would be our latest as far as, we'll know what they want if they want a new requirement. Because I know the cybersecurity checklist, I think that's something we received at the end of February even last year that we had to have ready to go by the end of March. So some of that stuff could change. But I mean, we will have to update them on our project, on our progress, on where we are on things, at least by the end. I think it's March 31st of 2026 is their deadline.
Generally, the conversation that happens is if they're looking at your project to fund it, they're going to say, when you close, will you be able to put this? Will you be ready with a contract in hand from the contractor to put shovels in the ground after we close? And I mean the week after we close. They want a truck out there.
So here's an example, I guess. I have, my husband has family in the Wells County Regional Sewer District area, and we are technically in the first quarter of 2026 fiscally. That's where we're at. But that project in 2023 was 43rd, 2024 was 21, 2025 was 17. This year they were number 16. There were a few projects in the fundable range that fell out, but they were ready to go. So they were actually given $2 million forgivable loan. And they said, okay, we're bidding now. And we just kind of started going through this process. So they were 99% ready to go. And because they were 99% ready to go, they ended up kind of, getting bumped up because there were some projects that were in that fundable range that were like, oh, we're waiting on some things or whatever else,
And what size of project was that?
I'm not sure. But I just know we have family over there, and we're not their engineer, by the way. But that's just a project that had been bouncing around in the same fashion. I mean, I would say that's a very similar trajectory that the Marshall County Regional Sewer District was on prior to, these other outside circumstances that we've had come up. That project was a $5 million project.
And you got a $2 million forgivable loan. So a smaller project.
But it makes a huge impact on their monthly rate.
Absolutely.
I kind of think that we're at a point where we have to consider biting off less than we're biting off now.
In terms of the size of the project?
Yes, in terms of the size of the project.
Yeah.
Because we've been told that sometimes the funding agencies look more favorably where the size of their forgivable loan makes a real impact on monthly rates to the consumer. And maybe we need to consider rephasing this project to come up with a project that's smaller but more apt to result in better financial result to the consumer.
King, I think you described it earlier, where projects have been reduced. In fact, it was the Hudson Saginaw Lakes project in the port that you all were involved in. And I'm just asking this, I don't mean to bore all of you with my questions, but this is a sizable project, involves 7 lakes. And as Tom has suggested, and we've talked about it a lot, if you submit the project and say the project will be done in segments, does the funding agency look more favorable to say this is a $23 million project, but we see the value in cutting it down into segments and resubmitting it because essentially that's what you would do.
Yeah.
You would resubmit it every year and say, okay, we took phase 1, we got phase 1 done, now we got phase 2 done, and I'll just use examples. You just walk down the lakes from Lawrence to whatever it is at the end of the line, down the hall.
Well, it's important to remember that they didn't make that decision until after they had gone to bid. So they had gone all the way up to and next to that finish line before they decided to do what they did. And their phasing, not unlike this project, was more driven by the functionality of the future system. So they started at the downstream end of theirs, which is Saucony, because generally speaking, all of their wastewater is going to the west to a treatment facility that actually exists in toll road right of way because it used to belong to the IFA when the IFA was managing the toll road or managing the toll road lease. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but basically they didn't break it in half either because Hudson Lake is significantly larger than Saucony, so it was more of a building the first 33% and saving the last 67. In this case, if we were going to do that proactively, I think the phasing, and I don't think anyone that lives in the western end of the project's going to love to hear it, but the phasing is probably going to be driven mostly by your pump stations. And phase 1 is going to be everything that we have going to pump station 2. And phase 2 is going to be everything going to pump station 1, just to make it extra confusing with the pump station numbers.
Explain, and then what are you suggesting, that the east end of the project is where you're going to start?
About the east, what is it, it's Lawrence and Cook and Holland, they go to 2?
Yeah, a majority of that. And then I think that the split is that the east end would be about 330 homes to 270. So it would be almost a 50-50 split, but not quite.
But that would include portions of Lawrence,
Myers, Cook and Holland. And then Zaner and Latonka become phase 2. But we would still create the plans for one big project.
And also on projects of this size, we would typically bid this in 2 contracts just because you get more bids that way on a project that's, a little bit.
Does that help drive the cost down then? more bidders you get in, or they
Yeah,
just,
I mean, competition is, important in these projects, so.
Potentially. I could probably be pretty close to predicting the 4 or 5 that will likely bid, no matter, just because there's a particular kind of experience too with building these projects that some companies have and some don't even want to have. So.
So then would the user fees be different for the two different projects?
That'd be up to you guys. There will be for a while, but it's not uncommon, at least in my experience. I know the Steuben Lakes has done this or at least once, where they went back through and kind of recalculated everybody's bill to level it all out to make it less complicated for the citizenry as well as their administrative staff. So they would probably have specific rates for some period of time, and then you could decide to level it out sometime in the future. But they probably would have 2 different rates for the first several years, would be my guess.
But I also think in this case, so the first portion of the project would be building that pump station 2 and all the infrastructure to the Plymouth wastewater treatment plant. So, in a way, it's like the second phase or the west end of the project, it couldn't do that without that first end being built. So it's they're pretty interconnected. There's some districts and some projects where there's things that are totally independent. Like they have multiple wastewater treatment plants, they have multiple wastewater collection systems and stuff like that. So it would be kind of a little bit more difficult to keep those separate, but I mean, that is still up to the district's discretion on what makes sense to you as well. But I'm just saying in this case, it's a little bit more complicated because without the east end, the west end can't,
Right. No, the east end has to go first. There's just the topography. We didn't create the topography, neither did you. So.
At one time, you had talked about possibly diverting the flow to Ancilla as opposed to Plymouth.
I don't think that their timeline goals are going to be. I don't think the district has the ability to accommodate them. They're not held back by some of the same regulatory processes that you are,
and they have
and financial constraints.
And they have to do something now.
Yes, they can't wait at all. So, and we actually looked at some of those values and looked at the values of a treatment facility about that size, and those are the options that we didn't even put in the memo because it was dramatically different than using Plymouth as a treatment provider. And there are points that you're already getting in your SRF scoring related to that regionalization, even though it's not a final agreement yet. It's the project's goal, and I'm confident that we'll get there. We'll get to that agreement. We're not that far apart. I mean, frankly, we're pretty much this far apart. So it's just a matter of time. It didn't even really make enough sense to put it in the memo and put it in front of you, frankly. There's a lot of costs to a new treatment plant, and the permitting and the regulatory oversight is significant enough that there is currently a sewer district in Marshall County getting out of the treatment plant owning and operating business right now as we speak, because they don't want to deal with it anymore. So it's significant.
Well, it seems to me that in looking at the project overall, first of all, perhaps maybe it'd be more palatable. I'm skipping over a lot of other issues I want to talk about today, but I think it would be more palatable maybe to the financing organizations and maybe even talking to the county council and the county commissioners. I think this is one of those things that, quite frankly, I think we're at a juncture maybe where we need to have a workshop between the 3 bodies to talk about these things as we go forward. But perhaps maybe dividing the project up and submitting it as one, but saying we're going to stage it in a manner in which we're going to try. We'll see how we do. We'll see if we're successful in putting together a project that's suitable the folks that are involved in this particular issue. I mean, it seems to me that maybe that's the way we need to go at this point. But I think when you have a long discussion in a short period of time about doing that. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I want to comment on, well, thank you to Alice and both of you for giving us a massive amount of information that you give us and you give the public that's watching today, and to those who are opponents. I mean, quite frankly, the volume of this information is very helpful, as well as the information that I read from that's handed to me from time to time from those who are opposed to the project. I think what's really important here is, and since I was a latecomer to this whole project, is why we were here and here as a board and how we got here and what the board was charged to do. It becomes, from my opinion, and just my opinion, I'm 1/7 of the crowd here. It comes to my opinion, to my attention, and my opinion that we got a really volatile situation around the lakes here, and I'm not talking about the other 12 service areas that were identified at this point. I think the lakes really create a significant problem for us because of the way they were laid out. It's nothing that anybody in this room particularly did over time, as long before you and I showed up in water properties. I suppose some of you may have been on the lake long enough to remember when they were divided in this fashion. But I think Quinn's point about the state regulations that are required if the systems start to fail, and looking at the age of the systems that we have on the lake. But this is a significant problem, and one that can be addressed in different ways. I mean, we've heard the options from Swaghammer, and you pointed out some of the challenges with that, and Ms. Quinn pointed out what's required for a septic system in general. But one of the things I think, a common thread I see in all of those options is you need the leach field. I think is that right? You need the leach field in each and every one of those options. You're still dumping the refuge into the soil and developing that plume that spreads out through the soil, as I understand it, during a little bit of reading. It creates the potential problem for ground contamination to our drinking water and to the lakes. And I think we all can agree, whether you favor this project or not, the one thing that I, as a lake owner, and I think Mr. Woodward will agree to me, I want clean water and I want clean lakes. And how we get there is part of the consumer's choice. Now, I think Ms. Quinn pointed out to us that in a lot of these situations where we've got the smaller lots and you look at these alternative programs, that there's some real challenges there. And the consumer, if the consumer decides to go that way, carries a lot of risk. Whether it's financial risk or simple risk that the system fails again and you're right back in the same spot you were before, and then you wish the sewer system had gone around the lake. The second aspect of everything that I've seen since I've been here is the cost of this thing. I mean, it's expensive. There's no doubt that it's expensive. It's going to take, in my opinion, the help of the county council and county commissioners, as well as from the Indiana Finance Authority, probably to make this thing go. And I think Kenny pointed out one of the problems we got right now is we got a conflict between county council, county commissioners, and the sewer district. And that doesn't look favorable about the way we're behaving about this thing. And those challenges come up. I'm not, I spent 38 years listening to those challenges, and I know there's situations like this, and those things will come up. Those challenges will be resolved at some point in time for one side or the other. But regardless of how they're left, we still have the problems that we see around the lake with regards to these sewer systems. So How do we attack it? How do we go about it? I mean, the district here is obviously one way to do it. I think maybe working together, the project could continue to go forward and see if we can get viable funding for it. But again, I think we go right back to where I said the first time I sat in this room in April, and I said, ask questions of this board, challenge them as to what they're doing. I think that's been done. But it goes right back to, is this cost effective and is it a feasible project that each of the property owners who decide to participate, because you got to decide to participate, and you can take an exclusion or an exemption, whatever they call it, to the project, and then you can go on and you can select the way that you think is in your best interest if the project goes through. So I think still as a board, we're still at that point where we got to make a decision again, is this reasonable and is it cost effective to go this direction? And we still got some thoughts to give that. And again, I would encourage whether you're for or you're against this to keep an open mind about it as we go through it. And I'll be honest with you, I really think we need to sit down with county council and county commissioners and see if we can resolve our differences and to either move this thing forward or say, okay, we're going to give up and kick it down the road. So that's my 2 cents.
Dean, can I, I'm not trying to steal your last word or anything.
Yeah, it's not my last word. Don't worry, I never said that.
I can tell you that, and I'd say this in front of anyone that was willing to listen, but I think what it, and what I think JPR thinks it boils down to is a kind of a public policy question. And not kind of, but a public policy question. In that the 2 options that you're looking at, either you build a project or you don't. What that means is, to me, is you're either deciding that the solution to septic issues out there is best solved by the individual and on a case-by-case basis, knowing that that means there'll be some percentage of the population that eventually either has a problem significant enough that the worst-case scenario plays out for them, in that the house is no longer legally habitable. What that percentage is hard to say, and how long it would take for that to happen is also difficult to say because of all the other factors at play. Or a universal solution that doesn't have a expiration date on it. And the answer that question has had right here in Marshall County up until this project is, I think, well evident. If you look at all of the other significantly sized surface water bodies with dense residential development around and adjacent.
So you're saying that the majority of the lakes in Marshall County have gone to
They already have it.
They have them.
That's how that question has been answered, repeatedly over the last several decades in our same county that we're sitting in today. So,
and this project's a little bit different because you're infusing government into it, and in government, not everybody agrees. I mean, you move from one administration to another, and one administration makes promises, and then along comes another and says, "Well, I don't like the promises you made." But in these instances, and the sewer district board, as it is, and as it was created, IDM reviewed all the information that was presented to them at the time. And there's more information that comes along. I mean, I think there's even added information here that could have been given to IDM in support of this project. But the IDM says, okay, sewer district, go out and do your thing. And so we did. So they did. And so here we are, and we're trying to figure out the finer points of how you go about doing this thing, or whether you go forward with it. I'm just, I guess I'm still where I was at in April. I think this is a challenge. I think it's a challenge that ought to be taken on at some point, but I think it's going to take the effort of everybody involved, and some folks are going to have to back up a little bit, and some folks are going to have to go forward in their opinions in this thing. But I guess I'm getting more and more convinced that the option of putting the sewer in is probably a good one if we can squeeze the money where we need to squeeze it. I mean, just in that respect. But I just hate to have a catastrophic type of failure of the aging sewer systems and have the lake get polluted or the well water service polluted. But I don't know, and I'm sorry if I apologize for rambling, but I've spent a lot of time looking at this thing the last couple of weeks, and I think we need to slow down on our spending until we get some of these issues resolved. I guess Chris pointed out in October, perhaps maybe that'll, or at least one of them will be heard at that point in time. But I think the other part of it is that we really need to sit down and take a handshake with the council and the commissioners on this one and say, okay, let's see if we can sit together in a room and brainstorm it and work at it a little bit. If not, then we walk away from it. It's just as simple as that to me. That's my opinion. Okay, I'm done.
Okay. Done, Kenny, with the engineering side?
Well, I mean, I guess one of the thought there, if I look historically at all the projects that we've worked on over the last several decades, with which I've been personally involved and a few others have, one of the patterns that we were just talking about a couple of weeks ago is until the late 2000s, right around the time of that recession that began, there wasn't a sewer from scratch project that we were involved in that didn't include a notable connection fee, because there was never grant or forgivable loan money available, because the programs were always mean household income derived, and it's hard to find low mean household incomes when we're talking about lakefront for the most part, for reasons that are obvious. And it was around that time that suddenly you started seeing these grant programs that were like kind of irrespective of income. It's part of how Coons Lake is still paying $60 a month to this day because of the timing of their project. And they built a treatment plant, a small treatment plant, that's similar in size to the population size you're serving here. A little bit bigger, but not by much. And in the years since, we haven't seen a project with a connection fee anywhere. And I'm not saying you need one here. I'm not at all saying that. But there were connection fees like in Porter Township, Michigan in 2003 of $9,000 or $8,000 per home. And they moved forward with a project because they felt strongly that it needed to be done. And that was in 2003 money. So that's another interesting evolution that we've seen. What it means to this project, I'm not implying any which way or the other. I'm just trying to share as much information as we have, that's all.
Well, next on the agenda is the financial consultant update, but I don't believe there is one today. And now we come to the public comment portion of our meeting. We ask anybody that wishes to come forward, state their name, their address, and please limit your remarks to 3 minutes if you can.
Hello, my name is Ralph Richard Huff. Most people call me Rick Huff. I live at 14240 Nataka Trail, which is on the south side of Lawrence Lake. First of all, I'd like to thank this board for the work under what seemed to be really trying circumstances, and appreciate for putting up with all the pressure you have and continuing to plug away. And I would say that Allie was out for a site visit at my home, and very pleasant to work with and explained all my questions very satisfactorily, so I compliment her on that. I'm all for the sewer system. It's not because I want to see people burdened with unnecessary money. I just think it has to be done. The situation can only get worse and will only be more expensive in the future. And I could name projects, and I know you've thought of projects, public projects, where that was the case. It's always hard to bite the bullet and stand the new expense, but it's worth it, and it has to be done eventually. Also, from my own experience, having served on a board, and this was dealing with a federal agency, so it wasn't exactly the same, where we had money, a lot of money, coming from the federal government, but we had new elected officials that decided to interfere and put things off. We were told, look, you don't want this money, there are plenty of other people that do, and that's where we're going to use it. We're not going to mess around like this. I think that could happen here. If there was public money or state money available now or possibly available, I think if it's put off, that could disappear. It's happened in the past. So I'm for the project. I appreciate the feelings of those that are not. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Who else would like to come up and speak?
Obviously me.
Okay, Bill.
I thought we had on the list, we had to check our names. Anyhow, I checked my name. I didn't realize you weren't going to call them off today. But so most of the discussion here has been about cost. And we've talked about this over and over and over. And we've got many people out there. These lakes are not high dollar lakes for the most part. Okay, so the income levels are not probably what the standard income level or the median level is in the county. There's a lot of people that are going to be adversely affected. They've been here and they've said so. You know, Baker Tilly, almost 3.5 years ago, estimated with no grants, it was going to be about $209 a month. So you've heard people say that they can't afford that $209, and then they can't afford the connection fees. I have talked to quite a few people. I was out in Granger last week, visited a couple of sites that were new installations on septic systems and housing projects in Granger, not too far from the mall up there. And everybody in those projects, and there's several of them, they're all septics, and they continue to be septics up there. And talking with that particular contractor up there, it's $12,000 to $15,000 on average to make the connection between the house and the sewer if the sewer goes in. He's done many of these. And he said that's if the homeowner has to put in the grinder pump. It's between $12,000 and $15,000. So you've got residents that can't afford the $200 a month, and then you've got the connection fee that they can't afford, and then if they have to get a loan, if they can qualify for the loan, they're going to be at least a $200 a month loan. So now you're looking at $400 a month for these people. And then you've got people that are going to go for the exemption. And JPR has stated that there's about 200 permits on file. Okay, so out of about 600 homes, I would imagine those 200 homes are probably functioning properly and that they will pass inspection. So unless you somehow disqualify those 200 homes, you're taking 200 homes off of the list of people that are going to be servicing, are being serviced by this and paying fees. So now that price just went up another 30%. So at what point, is it too much for the people, and at what point are they going to be responsible for their own house? I don't want to be responsible for somebody who has a problem. That's not my responsibility. And you've got a lot of people that are saying that. You know, yeah, there are people that are going to have problems, and there are ways to help them, and there are solutions. And if there's not a solution, why does everybody else have to pay for those people that have the problem? Okay, when they bought the house, or you know, it was small to start with, they knew there was potentials. I bought a house that doesn't have that potential that others have. But at what point? Okay, at what point is it too much? I want a number, because you're already looking at $400 to $600 a month if these people have to pay $200 a month and $200 for a loan to connect, and then people that are gonna get the exemption, at what point is it too much? People wanna know that. We've heard nothing except from the board, well, if it gets to be too much, we'll put it on hold or we'll reevaluate. What is that number? Have you ever thought about it? Have you talked about it? I'd like to know. I mean, the people would like to know. What are your thoughts? Because you can keep going like there is no stopping, there is no holding the project. You've said that it's not going to stop unless you can't get funding. So that tells us that if it's ever too expensive, it's bullshit, to excuse my French, but that's just a flat out lie if it's going to continue, and it's never going to stop if it gets to be too much for the people. So at what point is it too much? At what point are the people responsible for their own system instead of everybody else being responsible for their system? Does anybody have an answer? Anybody?
Can I comment on a couple?
And I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to these guys. I'm not talking to you. I want something from the board. I've talked to contractors that have been giving me numbers, and those are the numbers I'm quoting.
I'm not arguing with your numbers, but I want to make sure that we're talking apples and apples. If you're saying $12,000 to $15,000, and that includes the installation of the grinder station, well, I've been seeing $17,000 to $25,000 at Coons Lake when someone's building a new house where there's a new grinder station required.
Okay, but that's
This project doesn't include the grinder station installation as part of the public project, not part of the private. And in Kosciuszko County, at Tippecanoe Lake and the Chapman Lakes that are nearing the end of their customer connection period right now, we've been seeing $3,000 to $5,000 to get connected to the stub on overall average.
Okay, well, I've talked to several contractors, okay? And so now if you want to take that grinder pump out of the situation, take $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 off, you're still looking at $8,000 to $10,000 for a connection. Now that's on a good lot. That has nothing to do with going behind the house, around a lift station or anything else. It's never going to be for most of these people any less than that. But at any point,
I know you've been coming to these meetings for a long time. And if you've been coming to these meetings for a long time, you know that this board has expressly stated on many occasions that this is not a feasible project at $200 a month per customer. We've said that repeatedly. We also brought in an expert from USDA to share with the general public the grant program for people on Social Security. If they would like to qualify, because you make under $43,000 a year, you qualify for up to a $10,000 grant.
But how many people qualify?
Well, you just suggested there'd be a lot of them. In your remarks, you said.
I didn't suggest that they would qualify for those USDA
You suggested there were a lot of low-income people on our lakes, which is probably true.
But low income is under the $60-some thousand that the median is. Okay, it's not that. That's very low, is what the USDA says.
But I think you need to refresh your recollection. This board has told the community many times, this is not moving forward, $200 a month. And we've also tried to bring in solutions. So, I mean, this was a two-way street.
So right now, if Baker Tilly says with no grants, at 3.5 years ago, it was $209 a month. That's already over the $200 you just said. So,
We have stated we're not moving forward on that kind of a basis.
Anything over $200 a month?
We don't even want to get we're close to $200. We need to get that monthly cost as close to $100 as possible.
$100 a month is where I've said I'd stand on this thing. Now, having said that, you got that there are costs associated with each particular property. I'm one of them. I've told you this before. I mean, this is going to take a big swing at me if the sewer system comes around.
Well, mine's going to be $12,000 to $15,000 for me.
Well, I go to get and get a loan. I don't know, but there's going to be a cost associated with it, and some of them are going to be borne by the landowner. But it's in terms of the operational cost to the consumer when the line passes by, I've always said that $100 is where I want to be. Now, everybody can use numbers and figure numbers, and you're right, we need to perhaps maybe grind down well, I didn't even use that term. Grind down on the number a little bit better and say, okay, this is how we're going to be able to try to get that done. And you know, I've seen other folks set and do some marvelous calculations with some numbers and making the project look really poor. And then I've seen numbers, the same numbers utilized and saying, oh, this is not so bad. We can work the numbers this way. Maybe you're right. I'm not going to disagree with you. Maybe we need to get down and settle on a specific number. As far as the service goes, I'm at that $100, and I've told you that from day one. I haven't changed my mind. Baker Tilly hasn't changed my mind. County council, county commissioners aren't going to change my mind. I'm stuck on the $100. That could be plus or minus a couple of dollars either way. I'd rather be, what'd you say, Prune Slate, 50, $60? I'd rather be $60, to be honest with you.
55.
And if I could figure out a way to do that, you know, that's the direction I go. I'm personally, I'm 1/7 of the board. I'm not looking to go up on that number. I'm looking to be at that number or down to that number. Now, there's some penalties to doing that, because if I'm going to keep the rate down, then I'm going to have to look at expanding out my payout in order to retire the debt if I'm obligated to whatever debt I'm retired to. There's an expense to that.
Right.
Okay? Which makes the project seem even more expensive. I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
I understand, yeah.
So it's important, and that was my point, that maybe collectively the sewer board, the county council, the county administrators want to sit down and they could say, no, we don't even talk to you guys anymore. We've made up our mind. We're not. We've made political decisions about the way we want to take this, and we're not going to back off. If that's the attitude that we're going to get, you know, so be it. They're politicians. I mean, that's the way it is. But you got to remember and I don't want to get off point here, but you got to remember when the sewer board was formed, it was formed as a utility. Just like fiber optic or NIPSCO or anyone else, an independent board that the oversight, and I'm going to make this point too, the oversight lies with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, who created the board, who says to the board, look, you follow the plan. You follow the plan and you can move forward. Well, that's essentially what this board did from day one. They followed the plan. They didn't have any money to start the plan, but they acquired the money through the bond anticipation notes. I'm rehashing all this, and I know this is a G-rated movie at home. I hope there's no kids sitting around watching you and I argue sewer here, but so I watch my language. But the short side of the story is that we've gotten to a point where I think everybody needs to sit down and figure it out. And if it doesn't work out at this point, then the project's canceled. But to your specific question, $100 is where I'm at. That's where I'm staying. So you got 1/7 of my vote at $100, plus or minus a couple of bucks. That's where we're at. But when you say it's $100, then you got to understand, and I think you do, that it's going to expand the period of time or the term in which you retire the debt on the notes. So that's the direction I hope that we can work to get it resolved. I mean, would you agree? I mean, I guess this is my time to ask you questions. Would you agree that based on what you've seen in terms of the lot sizes and the regulations that Ms. Quinn indicated, and the age of the septic systems along the lake period, that there's a potential problem there?
I would agree that there are some lots that are really going to struggle to get some kind of septic in, some kind of system, but the majority aren't. And you're asking the majority to pay for those few that are really going to struggle. And like she said, there is adjustments that can be made. You get the best you can get to a point, and then at certain point there isn't. Okay, but still, and back to the IDM, they did not require sewers be installed. They said that the best options, and because I've talked to IDM, I've talked to them in Indian, I've talked to them in South Bend, the regional office, and it wasn't a sewer is required thing. So the oversight on that, and it's what's the best option. You know, you might be a utility, but maybe the best option is to set up a management type system to manage the systems that are out there and make requirements. Okay, there's a certain amount of inspections that are done, certain amount of maintenance that has to be done, certain amount of contracts, because this is done in all other parts of the country where they have large septic system community, and they go in and manage it versus putting in sewers because it's so costly to put in sewers.
Sure.
So, you know, and with new
You always gotta make
technology.
sure you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges and those kind of systems, those kind of situations. And to your point about what this particular board decided at the onset, that a closed system around the lakes that we have, the footprint of the lakes that we have here, looked and appears to be the best solution for the problem, and that's what they went forward on. So that's where we're at. But you know, you can't draw back right now.
Right, and you're on that, and I'm on a different path. And you're right. Some communication has to be established, and there has to be some kind of something somewhere, because right now it's at total odds, because you've got a lot of people that just simply can't afford it, and it's going to push them out of their homes.
Don't think that I don't realize what's going on at the lake, and you know, you're right. There's socioeconomic conditions at the lake in some aspects of it. It's going to hurt some people. I've said that a long time ago. But again, I think this is one of those issues that, quite frankly, I think for the future, I think Mr. Huff was absolutely correct. This is the direction that, you know, in order to maintain clean water and that sort of thing around the lakes, both for drinking and recreational purposes. I mean, it's a public lake. I mean, we get folks on it all the time, and they use it to death. I mean, you and I both know that at the landing on any particular weekend, there'll be 15 to 20 cars in that crowded area, along with the DNR standalone porta potty where everybody goes there or on the ground, one of the two. Back to your point, I mean, you have my assurances that we're trying, not trying, we'll get there in terms of keeping it around $100.
But then these people are still going to need help with the connection fees.
Well, and maybe that's where USDA comes in. That's one. That's one
Possible,
option.
but
The other option is maybe we sit down with the county council and county commissioners and we say, is there some way that we can develop a relief fund for those people, or because they've made statements in the past that may be an option.
But I think all those options need to also be considered and presented and thought of along with just a monthly fee. I mean, if you got to give people options for that too, because you can't just say you're going to do it and those people can't afford it. And to your point, the USDA is good for septic or sewer. I mean, so if somebody needs to update their system, they can do it either way. USDA is still available for that.
But understand, from my point of view, again, it's the district point. The district can only go so far with that help and aid. I mean, our help and aid is making sure that we make that commitment to you, and I've made that commitment, that we stay around that $100 mark. But in terms of other types of relief beyond what USDA presented, I don't see that the district can find a grant or do something of that nature to help those folks out. That may come from the other side of the political point.
And I'm not saying that you guys do that. I'm just saying maybe you would want to talk with the commissioners and the council and try and find ways. And you guys can still present and say, these are your options, the county commission, blah, blah, blah. But I think all these avenues need to be looked at and presented, not just trying to get it down to $100, or whatever that number is. But right now, anything over $200, it's killing a lot of these people out here. I don't mean literally, but I mean, it's financially, it's going to put quite a few out of their homes.
So I guess, I hope I answered your point to say you want a number. I mean, you got your number.
And that's what I'm looking for. What is the number you're going to try and hold to? So these people know they can either plan or they can start figuring what their recourse is, but they need to know the number.
Bill, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
I
Tom.
think there are two ladies that wanted to speak. Gail Henry. They just did it 20, 30%.
Hi, Gail Howitt, 12482 Olive Trail, Lawrence Lake. The letters that you guys voted to send out, is that for the easements? The letter that you voted today, is that?
We're sending out people reminder letters about asking for site visits and to sign easement agreements. That's what the letter is about.
That's what I thought. And I just have one thing to say is, months ago, Bill had asked Kenny when the easements have to be in. And he had stated it was either like the week of or the week before they're starting construction in your area. So my thought is just, why are you wasting money sending letters out when it's not needed yet? I can go back and look at the tape.
Maybe I misspoke. I don't remember saying that.
I thought you said right before construction starts in your area. That's when you absolutely need those easements.
I'm sorry if I missed.
Can I? Yeah. So I'm just wondering why you're wasting money sending out letters.
Can I jump in and help you out there? Well, I'm not sure what dates they were because I don't have a recollection of that. And you could absolutely be correct. But I think the important thing for the board and for Kenny, because I've gone through this easement process and I've not turned my easement in because I got a particular issue that we got to resolve before I say it's okay because it affects the future development of my property, perhaps for some other buyer. But I think the important part is we send the reminders out to the property owners and say, hey, look, we'd like to get your easement in so that they can do the scheduling and us as a board has a better idea of what's going on in relationship to folks and the easements along the project. So getting them in as timely as possible is a benefit to Kenny, and it's also relevant to us for at least understanding how the project's moving along in relationship to those people who want to hook up to the sewer that have made that decision. So, yeah, you're right. Your date could be right and correct, but we've got to keep refreshing people's memory. Refreshing people to say,
kind of slow down the spending while we're
going to slow the spending down. It's going to be, I'm going to tell you.
And perhaps start with the news.
It's going to be a drip, for sure.
Okay. I believe Serena Henderson wants to speak. Still got to communicate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Serena Anderson. I live at 17085 Tomahawk Trail. Few questions, statements in no particular order. We've been talking about connection costs and how numbers have just varied. And so honestly, I don't have a set number or quote. But even if it's only, $2,000 or $3,000, that's still a decent amount of money. That's a whole month's worth of bills, mortgage, groceries, insurance. And you've talked about USD loans and whatnot. Well, I'm not 65, not yet at least. And so on paper, my husband and I, it looks like we're doing great. I mean, we both work full time, we went to college, we have our degrees. So we would not qualify for any of the low income loans, but that does not mean that we can shell out $3,000, $4,000, $10,000, $25,000, whatever it might be. So I'm just kind of keeping that in mind that people that don't qualify, I don't know if I'm the youngest person in this PSA, but I'm hoping that there's other people my age that also are doing well enough, but not well enough to be able to afford the connection cost. So just something to think about. Some of the young families that will be around for the next 35 to 40 years that will end up paying the full amount of this project. Secondly, I heard from JPR you had made a comment about a line system that would give property owners a little bit more power or control. Is there ever going to be a possibility of making this connection optional, where you have the line system implemented, and let's say you have property owners that want to connect and they're willing to pay whatever price it is, but you have other property owners that don't want to connect, that have systems that work, that are willing to or able to replace their system in 5, 10, 20 years and still don't want to connect? Would that ever be a possibility to make this?
It wouldn't be financially fundable. No one would ever loan on that. That's just the reality.
If the project was
Voluntary.
optional connection project-wide, yeah.
Unless the financing was, here's all.
Private. You're talking about the Indiana Finance Authority, that they wouldn't look at a volunteer
Right.
type of program.
Those are financed, is that, bonds issued and our rates are based on.
Deals with the stability of paying back the bond rates and that sort of thing.
And the closest thing I could think of to that is if, you did qualify for the exemption, and then in 20 years' time, you're like, okay, like, my exemption's expired, like, I've been putting away for this, whatever, and then you have your grinder station installed at that time. But that's the closest thing
Okay.
that I can think of.
So there's no optional option. It's more so if you get an exemption, then a later date you can connect. Okay.
And the Indiana law has changed recently in the last couple of years where, it used to be based on the age of your system. Like if your system was over a certain amount, then it doesn't matter, you have to connect. But now, all you have to do is just demonstrate that your system is in fact working properly. It's not based on age at this time.
You can qualify for up to a 20-year exemption. It's 10 years from the date that's said not to be failing, and then there's 2 renewal periods.
With the loan repayment, is it an increasing repayment loan? Like a student loan per se, where it's okay, originally it's going to be, $100 a month for the first year, and then it'll be $105, and before you know it, at year 35, it might be a $500 monthly payment until it's paid off.
That'd probably be a better answer or question for our financial advisor. However, generally when the rate making is done, the rate making is meant to be level over the course of the system.
Okay.
Including in that rate potential savings to do repairs and maintenance. So usually when the loan is paid off, it's not, rates don't go down. Now you are doing, hopefully you've saved for replacements and things along the way.
So it would be okay, the repayment or the monthly 35 year repayment of the loan will cost you $209, let's just say $209 for that entire 35 years, and it's not going to raise like a student loan repayment plan.
No, the rate making is such that the rate is set to be able to manage the system, operate the system, and service the debt.
Okay.
Around half of the rate, generally speaking, is associated with debt service, and the other half is associated with operation maintenance, paying the electric bills at the big pump stations, paying a monthly treatment cost bill to like the city of Plymouth, and paying the either the employees or the service provider that's babysitting the system, the guy or the people rather that show up after you call the 800 number on the side of the control panel because there's a problem of some kind. That half could be subject to some type of reasonable periodic adjustment as the cost of things go up. People like to get raises, that kind of thing. But the other half I have always thought of, so it behaves more like a conventional 30-year mortgage.
Okay, so it's
not an adjustable rate mortgage, but
conventional.
Yeah.
Okay. It was brought to the public's attention at a recent meeting that the ordinance through the health department regarding a 1 acre or half acre for replacement or septic repair replacement was actually not approved and it was being enforced illegally. Was that something that the board has or was aware of?
Were we aware of it?
We became aware of it. Were you aware of it prior and currently aware?
We became aware of it. I mean, I was sitting right there where Alice was sitting when I heard that about the 1 acre thing.
To update the board, I asked for clarification on that from the attorney who spoke at that meeting. I haven't gotten a meaningful response to that question. It's a land use question though, and I don't see how it's an issue. It doesn't have anything to do with septics.
It doesn't
We have
affect
nothing to do
us.
with it.
It doesn't affect us. You know?
It might affect some of the things Alice talked about though, with respect to older lots or not.
That if you'd like.
Actually, to be clear, it did affect us because in order to close on the parcel that we have under contract for Pump Station 1, Marshall County asked us to seek a variance on the subdivision plat because how small that parcel is. Even though it's never going to contain a sewage producing occupied building or home.
Well, you're saying that affected us in terms of locating our pump there.
You know, it affected us in terms of we can't close on that transaction until Marshall County is okay with that parcel being created.
And also one might believe or feel that it may have been a push to ensure that people are going to want city connection. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm just saying one might think that it was in cahoots with that if we push this ordinance for people that are having septic issues, it'll force them to want to connect. So moving forward, what is the board going to do to ensure that you're working with the health department and all ordinances and all variations are legal, approved, and in ordinance with the state?
That apart from Kenny's issue as far as the subdivision of real estate, the ordinance with regard to subdivision of land and how Marshall County allows development within its county doesn't affect the district. You know, they've made a public policy decision that, as far as I'm aware, is still law that says if you want to subdivide land, that it needs to be this big if it's got sewer, and it needs to be this big if there isn't sewer. That's just a practical consideration about it.
Land planning.
The way it's written, I think, is it's if there's sewer available, it can be this big. If there's not sewer available, it can be this big. So that doesn't have anything to do with the district, but it's relevant to the fact that, practically speaking, as Alice's presentation stated, you need space for septic. You don't need space for sewer.
The last.
Alice had a comment.
Oh yes, Alice.
The way we understand it, well, I know that the law is written, that law that passed in 2023 was written, indicating that any local ordinance that had, and that's not just a health department ordinance, any local county, city, or town ordinance that had anything more restrictive than our on-site sewage system rule was null and void. So it's our understanding that that's also your building and zoning ordinances and your plating ordinances that require a specific acreage based upon whether there's connection to sewer or not. So we've actually had a couple of counties come up against this, and they've had to change their ways as far as requiring certain acreage in a lot. There's also a new statute that was passed just a couple of years ago that said any building lot that has at least one suitable site for an on-site sewage system can be built on. A lot of counties required a primary site and a secondary set-aside site, and they cannot require that anymore.
However, sewer districts can.
Serene, you had another question?
Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I guess it was more so just a last statement. I know sometimes as a higher up official or on a board or an elected official, it's easy to think, well, the public needs to do their own specific research as well. Don't count on, the officials having to do all the research for you. And I will say, as a teacher, it is very difficult for many people in this digital age to find or research and find credible sources. So I do think that as a board, in this mist of back and forth and pros and cons, to ensure that all information on both sides are being presented. I do appreciate all of the information given regarding the revolving fund and the presentation. I was a little disappointed that there wasn't any information of the pros and cons of a sewage connection as well, so people could get the full idea, because we all know nothing is perfect. So I think it would have been beneficial to also give the public kind of an idea of what to expect and what problems to expect and what positives to expect with a sewage connection, because we all know that there's always going to be a positive and a negative with anything that you decide. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just have a question.
Sure.
And it's for yours, Chris. You had said that they changed that law, and I had asked you this before, and you said you would post, pardon? The 10-year law? Yeah, thanks, the 10-year law, and you said you would post that on the website, and it must have slipped your mind, because I can't find it.
We have the exemption information in the letter on the website,
I
right?
believe so.
Yeah, it's in that.
But
It's in the.
IDEM doesn't have that. I mean, we've looked at IDEM's rules, and they still say it has to be within 10 years.
That might be a separate item. Well, it's 1326 specifically says that it's just certified as at the time of inspection, not failing.
1326.
1326 5. It's in there. 2.5. 2.5.
Last time I looked at it, it still had the 10-year, had to be newer than 10 years last time I looked at it.
It might be an old. Sometimes when you dual and it's pulling from not the it pulls from years past. So if you go to the Indiana legislature site and look at 1320 for 2025, 1326 5 2.5. Yeah, down there.
You were right.
Yes.
No, that's
the
fine,
site.
I just didn't see an item.
Yeah.
So that,
Great.
They
Thank you,
they
that's all
would
I
post
wanted
it. That's the sign for the septic exemption of what both sewer districts.
The fact that they changed it from 10 to 20 years speaks to what we mentioned earlier about what your two options are. Your option is a public system that is a forever solution, or a solution that has time constraints associated with the design life of an on-site system. That's why when they changed it from 10 to 20 years, they didn't go from 10 years to infinity. And I think that should be noted.
Okay, well, that's the end of the public comment period. Is there any other business to be brought before the board today? Comments?
But, yeah, I do. What are we gonna do for, October's meeting in November? Are we gonna plan on having a meeting, or?
Well, I think it might be a good idea to pause our meetings for, at least for October.
Yeah, I mean, generally the way that you have it scheduled, there's no specific statute on the notice requirements on canceling meetings, but we've always taken the position that if you have to give 48 hours notice to have a meeting, you should give 48 hours notice to cancel a meeting. So if you were to cancel it now and you had business, you'd have to re-notice it. So my suggestion would be to say, see if there's any reason to have it, and if there isn't, then we can publish notice to cancel it.
Yeah, because obviously there's a cost savings by not having the meeting.
Yep. So, and the hearing will not be.
It could be before the meeting.
When's the first day in October?
First, so it would be the 8th.
Yeah, the meeting will be before our hearing, so I won't have any updates.
Okay.
We do need to stay on top of our financials though, as far as paying bills, that
Oh,
sort
yeah.
of thing. So,
Anything else? Well, do I have a motion to close the meeting? Make a motion to adjourn. All in favor? So we can go to your house and all that stuff.
Yeah.